Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Lecture 2 on World War II. Today we're going to talk about Italy invading Ethiopia and Africa and Germany, breaking the Treaty of Versailles and rearming and building an axis of power. We'll briefly touch on the Spanish Civil War. We'll talk about the new weapons and tactics, the Munich Conference, and the Nazi-Soviet non-aggression pact. Lot to talk about. Let's get busy. Thank you for listening. So, in this slide, you can see the fascist dictator of Italy. His name's Benito Mussolini, and he's firing up, addressing his followers. Those fascists were always very charismatic, very animated speakers. And although Italy had been on the winning side in World War I, the war devastated their economy. And inflation and unemployment shot up like a rocket, and the fascist movement began to develop. Many Italians were dissatisfied with the government, and they were looking for someone who could take charge of the situation. Benito Mussolini led the fascist political party, which was known as the Fascia di Cambiamento. He promised strong leadership, he attacked the government in speeches, and he had a personal army called the Black Shirts that would physically attack communists and socialists in the streets. So in October of 1922, about 30,000 fascists march on Rome, and they demand that the Italian king, Victor Emmanuel, give control of the government to Mussolini. The king concedes, he agrees, and Mussolini is asked to form a government. Upon assuming power, Mussolini quickly abolishes democracy and he outlaws other political parties, he jails his opponents, and he censors the media. So in this next slide, we see the Ethiopian royal family. And it should be noted that Mussolini's plans, also included imperial expansion. Italy wanted empires, Italy wanted colonies, and Italy wanted to build an empire that would rival that of Great Britain or England. In 1935, Mussolini invades Ethiopia with one of only 4 nations on the continent of Africa that had held off European imperialism. Back again, sorry for that minor interruption. Back to the invasion of Ethiopia. Ethiopia's emperor is pictured right here. Haile Selassie, I'm not sure if I'm going to say that right. But he appealed to the League of Nations for help, and the League publicly condemned the attack, but it was powerless to do anything about the situation. By 1936, Italy had complete control over Ethiopia. So the other troubling event that happened was Germany rearming in clear violation of the Treaty of Versailles. So as soon as Hitler becomes chancellor or president of Germany, he begins to rearm the country. By March of 1935, Hitler had 2,500 warplanes and an army of 300,000. Although Germany made no attempt to hide this rearmament, no international response occurred. Most likely because other countries were struggling to cope with the effects of the Depression. Even the League of Nations turned a blind eye to the situation. In March 1936, Hitler's troops retake the Rhineland in France. In the country of France is terrified at the prospect of fighting another world war. They did nothing. Britain, or England, urges other nations to do whatever was necessary to avoid starting a full-scale armed conflict with Germany. And this policy is called appeasement, making concessions or failing to counteract an aggressor in order to avoid war. So this process of appeasement guided Europe's reaction to Hitler's moves over the next 3 years. They just let him get away with building his army back up. And since he faced no consequences from invading the Rhineland, Hitler becomes bolder and bolder, and he tested the waters, and he realized he could get away with much more. So in the next slide, you see both Hitler and Mussolini chumming it up, and you see the signing of the tripartite pact to form the Axis alliance. So In Germany of 1936, Germany and Italy enter into a formal alliance known as the Rome-Berlin Axis. Less than a month later, Germany made a similar agreement with Japan. Collectively, these three nations, Germany, Japan, and Italy, become known as the Axis powers. So the picture on the right of this slide right here is the representatives of each government. There's the Emperor of Japan, Yoshiki Matsoko. There's Henrik Steimler of Germany and Mario Indelli of Italy. So next, we go to the Spanish Civil War. And in 1931, Spain replaces its monarchy, its king, with a republican form of government. A struggle between left and right-wing political factions followed. And after an unsuccessful military coup led by General Francisco Franco, in July of 1936, a civil war started. And Franco ultimately wins. You can see Franco, he's right here. This is Emilio More. He's the leader of the coup that overthrew the government. And Franco becomes a dictator in Spain. So, whoops, I'm going too far. Okay, so the Spanish War continued. We're going to talk about the nationalists, which are led by Franco. Were supported by both Hitler and Mussolini. So both Germany and Italy sent troops, tanks, and bomber planes to aid Franco's forces. Franco emerges victorious and becomes the head of the state, and he then outlaws every political party except his own, which is called the Phalange. F-A-L-A-N-G-E. So this picture is Italian soldiers in Spain, and what you see are the Axis powers flexing its muscles. And this is called, in the textbook, the rise of fascism. So Hitler uses the Spanish-American War to test his weapons and his military tactics. So during the First World War, planes had been used for reconnaissance, which is essentially spying on the enemy, and fighter combat. During the Spanish Civil War, planes built by Henkel Aircraft were used by the Luftwaffe, or the German Air Force, as bombers. So for the first time, we have planes really not just fighting each other, but dropping bombs on military targets. And of course, we're going to have, during the bombing of Berlin, or the bombing of London, you have Hitler dropping bombs all over England. So this slide talks about the destruction of Guernica. The Basque are a Spanish people that live in northern Spain. They had their own culture, their own language and traditions that were separate from the Spanish. And on April 27th, 1937, German bombers drop 100,000 pounds of explosive and fire bombs on the village of Guernica, which is the cultural capital of the Basque people. Fighter planes used machine gun fire to mow down civilians. More than half of the town is destroyed, and a third of the population is killed or wounded. Franco, the leader of Spain, picked Guernica for this test of blanket bombing in order to break the morale of the Basques, who did not support his nationalist cause. So here you see the total destruction of the city, and this is as Franco is taking over Spain. So Germany, in turn, takes Austria, and here you see Hitler's troops marching in their uniforms. You see the citizens saluting them. Hitler believed that all German-speaking people in Europe should be part of a new German empire. Many of the people lived in countries that bordered Germany, specifically Austria and the Sudetenland, which is now the western part of Czechoslovakia. Hitler also felt that Germany was overcrowded and that the German people needed Lebensraum, or living space. So he therefore planned to take by force Austria and Czechoslovakia. And after being threatened by attack, the Austrian chancellor appoints Nazis to control the government. In March of 1938, the German troops took control of Austria, declaring it to be part of the German Reich. And this action is called Anschluss. Again, Hitler faces no consequences, no backlash from the international community for this aggressive action. So in the next slide, we'll see the Munich Conference. And here you have England's Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain talking to Hitler at the Munich Conference. We have a weeping Czech woman saluting the Nazi soldiers as they march into her homeland, also known as the Sudetenland. So Hitler sets his sights on Czechoslovakia. His first demand is for the Sudetenland, which, as we know, borders Germany, and most people living there speak German. Tensions ran high because Czechoslovakia was prepared to defend itself, and France had pledged to help it in case of an attack. Mussolini, Italy's leader, suggests a meeting to prevent war over Czechoslovakia. And as you noted earlier, fear of war led many nations to follow this policy of appeasement. With this in mind, British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain agrees to a meeting with Germany, and the meeting is held in Munich, Germany, in September of 1938. The conference produces an agreement between Germany, Britain, Italy, and France that the Sudetenland would immediately be given to Germany, with promises that German aggression would come to an end. Upon returning to England, Chamberlain proclaims, or he announces, he had secured peace for our time. But 6 months later, in March 1939, Hitler invaded and takes the rest of Czechoslovakia. So it becomes very, very clear that appeasement had failed, and fearing that Hitler would next set his sights on Poland, Britain and France publicly promised to protect this country against Nazi aggression. So Hitler also signs a Nazi-Soviet non-aggression pact in August of 1939. The Russians and the Germans agreed to a 10-year non-aggression pact. In addition to their public agreement never to attack each other, the two sides secretly negotiate a deal over Poland. Stalin will not act against Germany if Germany attacks Poland, and then Germany and the Soviet Union would divide Poland between them after the Germans seized the country. So this is the final step to war, and the invasion of Poland is often considered the entry to World War I. So this next slide, we will look at the German advances. We're going to cover that in the next lecture. You guys covered 11 slides today. That's pretty good. So thank you for listening. Make sure you'll notice that there's less text on the slides, so you really have to rewind and get the content from listening. And remember, that isn't active listening is a skill. If you miss something, you space out, someone walks into the room, just rewind the video and listen for the content. Thank you very much. Have a great evening.